So today's session is about single sign-on. So single sign-on is one of the user authentication methods that can be used in Salesforce. Also, it is used by other apps, and it is a currently growing technology. So let's start with our session by going through the agenda that what we are going to learn today. So firstly, we are going to learn that what is SSO and what are its needs and advantages. What is SAML? SAML is generally a protocol that is used to implement the SSO. Uh, uh, then we are going to learn about what are the identity providers and service providers. And SSO generally works is executed in two ways. One through identity provider. So it's named as identity provider initiated flow, and the next with the service provider. So it is the flow is named as sales service provider initiated flow, and we are going to have a demo on both of them by using two Salesforce Org. We will be implementing it in our developer edition sandboxes, and so at last we will be validating a SAML response. So this is our agenda for today. So let us start our session for today with learning what is SSO. So single sign-on is an authentication method that enables user to securely authenticate with multiple applications and website by using just one set of credentials. Like what it does is, so whenever a user is logged into an identity providers and wants to access some another apps or another website or another platform or a technology, so single sign-on is the method through which uh, the user is directly taken from the one technology or one app to the another app. So when does this SSO actually comes into picture? So it takes place when a user logs into an app, like you can consider our KK app for Areya, and from Areya, if you know, there is in the home tab we can log into the Plum insurance app. So here SSO comes into picture. So when we are logging into the KK is acting as our identity provider, and since we are getting to logged into the Plum via the KK, so the SSO comes into the picture there, that you do not need to add your credentials or to follow any general procedures to log into them. You are directly logged into the Plum. So that's how SSO works. And so SSO works on a single credential. If you have a identity provider and you have connected that to many connected apps, so it eases the management of your usernames and passwords across all the accounts and its services. And so what SSM is generally a FIM tool. So a FIM is generally a federated identity management tool, which is an identity and access management access tool, which is a framework that allows orgs to securely confirm the identity of a user, and when they try to connect to another app or another website. So what are the needs and advantages? So only single set of credential is required when we use a SSO, and which reduces password fatigue. We may be knowing that saving different app passwords and remembering them is a kind of a huge task, and sometimes we forget our password. So this uh, this is removed by SSO. If we use SSO, it 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 strengthens our security because since we are only using one set of credentials. So yeah, but it is always recommended with an multi-factor authentication, because since I'm talking about the one set of credentials, you if your one set of credential have been lost, you lose you lose your access to the your main apps and other connected apps. And since the user can log into one app and then log into another any number of connected apps without any login times or entering credential, it saves a valuable amount of users time. So that are the advantages of SSO. So next thing is, how does this SSO thing really works? So SSO works by sharing and verifying the raw login credentials between the identity provider and service provider. So about the identity provider and service provider, we are going to see in next slides. So you may be thinking that SSO saves one amount, like SSO saves one user credential, which is uh, given to your identity provider, or it's not like that. It just verifies the login credentials of your one org and another org at the same time, and then lets you log in to all the orgs. So for an user to sign into an org, and um, an authentication token is required. So SSO creates that authentication token, which uses SAML. So we are going to learn about the SAML in next coming slides. So service provider can be your vendor, a product or a service or application or any other platform. So in the beginning, I gave you an example of Keka and our Plum insurance app. So Keka here acts as our identity provider, so which gives the identity and its credentials to the Plum, so that user can log in and you don't need to give any passwords or any other or follow any other login procedures for that. So yeah, or you can, in simple words, you can consider when you are going to watch a movie. So your ticket, so you are the identity provider, and when you give the ticket to watch a movie, to that is a service, and the tickets you give are your authorization tokens that these people are going to watch a movie. So in SSO, that movie tickets are your SAML. So what SAML is basically? So SAML basically stands for Security Assertion Markup Language. As the name goes, it's a security assertion. So what it does is it communicates between your identity provider or service provider or and the users uh, to authenticate the users and give them the access to whatever site or apps they are requiring access to. And the SAML is generally based upon XML language. Um, so it is generally built upon XML language for security. So we are going to see what's an identity provider initiated flow. We are also going to demo this in some coming time. So identity provider initiated flow is generally nothing but when a user, if you consider you are logged into and already logged into your Salesforce org, which is acting as an identity provider. So the first step is uh, that the user is already logged into the identity provider, and it now needs an access to another connected app. So what does the user do is, user clicks on the app in the Salesforce. So at the back end, at the back end in the browser, so the SSO process is started, which creates um, SAML assertion and is sent to the connected app that you would be using. And the Salesforce connected app then sends the assertion back that I have authenticated the user and the service provider can now authenticate the user and let him log in by creating his session ID. So that's how identity provider initiated flow works in an SSO. And for service provider initiated flow, so the user directly needs access to the service provider org, but uh, he's then directed to the identity provider to provide his credential if required, or he is directly redirected to the identity provider, which then authenticates the user. And if the user is authenticated, then the Salesforce redirects to the requested page by the user by creating his session ID. So we will now see the demo for both. So I would be using two Salesforce org here. One is my identity provider org, and the other one is my what you can say, which I would be using as my service provider org. So in identity provider org, to let you know, so just because you don't confuse, there would be a symbol or Areya's logo here, or you can just check on the what you can say URL. So my URL would be IDP Roshan Areya for my identity provider org, and my URL for the service provider org will be Areya Demo SP. So while the first step for starting with your SSO is you need to enable whatever domain you want to use. So sometimes before starting, you need to change your domain. So from settings, from setup, in quick find box, you need to type your my domain. In my domain, you would get here your domain details and everything like that. If for testing for testing SSO or trying SSO, you don't need to change whatever you can use, but sometimes organization asks to change us this domain URL before configuring our SSO. So you need to check that whatever domain your organization has asked you to give them, so that is populated over here, or you can just edit and you can give whatever name they have requested you to give them. The next thing, so firstly I'm doing this, I'm currently in my identity provider org. So next thing you have to do is you have to go to the identity provider in the setup, and you have to create a certificate again over here. So this I would tell you where this certificate would be used and everything like that. So I have a certificate created over here. So um, so I would just download the certificate. The certificate you can name anything, and then just download the certificate and its metadata. That's it for the identity provider. Or then we need to go to the service provider or and see. First we need to enable. First we have to go to the single sign-on settings. In single sign-on settings, you would see 4 settings that disable login with Salesforce. I will come to this point later. So first thing you have to do currently is you have to enable SAML in your service provider, or and the option of appears here to create single SAML single sign-off settings. There are 3 options available: new, click on new from metadata file, and new from metadata URL. So when you create new, so a page appears where you need to enter your name, the name of the single sign-on. The API name generally gets populated by itself. The second method was from the metadata file. You remember we just now downloaded the metadata file from the our IDP or identity provider or so we will paste that here. So when you use the metadata file provided to you by the identity provider or you can see the fields are generally uh, populated by itself. And to let you know about the important fields over here are name. So this name would appear. um, I will come back to this name later. And the issuer is your domain URL of your identity provider. If you see this, if you see this URL, this is the same URL over here. Entity ID. Entity ID is the URL of your service provider org. So if you can see this is the same URL as this one. Also, then identity provider certificate. So you know that we downloaded one certificate from the uh, identity provider, or we need to provide that over here. So certificate just acts like your authentication token. We have populated that, and everything else is just populated over here. Now the other settings are request signing certificate. This option can be used if you want to have some extra level of security. So uh, only currently I have no certificate enabled in my org, so no certificate is been populated here. So if you want an extra level of security, you can create another certificate for your service provider org also and provide that here. So signature method is an again and just methods, and it has two options over here. So it just an like how your certificate would be signed and which language or what complexity you want for your certificate to be signed. So next main character is the SML identity type. So it provides you with three identity types used for verification. That one is Salesforce username, the other one is the federation ID, and the next one is the user ID from the user object. So the federation ID is most preferred method because sometimes when you are passing your username, Salesforce username, it is not safe, and sometimes user ID is also not safe. So federation ID, I would like to tell you in some time what an federation ID, and since it mentioned that it is on a user object, we are going to populate it for the user, one of a user. So the next thing is a SAML identical location. So whenever a SAML response is being populated, so you pass some identity. For us, we are going to pass a federation identity from identity provider to a service provider. So or you can pass it as an attribute also. And the next is service provider initiate request binding. Currently, if you select both, it works the same, but HTTP post is recommended because sometimes in HTTP redirect, your credentials are being passed in the URL or in the logs, so that is not safe. So rest of the settings are being populated. This is just login ID, which would be uh, which would be like redirecting to when we are going through the SP initiated flow. We need to just populate the certificate again. So there is one more setting provided by in the sales single sign-on, that is user provisioning enabled. So what this is, sometimes in your service provider or you may not have a user and you need to create that user from your identity provider org itself. Consider a user by name Roshan is not present in the service provider org, but you are trying to create a user from your identity provider org itself. So you can create check this, and sometimes uh, for, for by default it is using standard method, and you can also give some apex class to decide when to create a user. Currently we would not check this. So we have filled every required details over here, so we will go ahead. So after you have created your single sign-on, so you get 3 URLs below your single sign-on settings. I will let you know where to we have to use this in a minute. So I was telling you about that we pass some federation ID. So what that federation ID is, so when we go to the user, there is a field by name federation ID. So what does this federation ID does is, so when I'm trying to log in from an identity provider or to service provider, or it checks my which user is currently trying to log in. So if I give the name currently as Roshan Dev, it would accept. And so the main thing to keep in mind over here is the user in the identity provider or with uh, federation ID name Roshan Dev should have the same federation ID in his service provider org. So I have given my user currently as Roshan Dev. So we will now go to the identity provider org. If you can see the identity provider org, and then we need to create a connected app. So connected app name is the name that you would want to see in your app launcher. So we will give Areya demo for now. Contact email is just provided with some contact email and phone number. Logo image URL is the, or icon is the icon or logos which you want to see over here or in your mobile apps. So you can either populate your own URL or just choose from the one which has been provided by the Salesforce. The main thing for us here is when you are creating a connected app, just enable SAML. So entity ID. So as you see the entity ID, you would get the entity ID in your service provider org. So just copy the entity ID from there to your identity provider org. ACS URL is nothing but again the login URL that is being provided here. Since we have given the subject type and we are using it as a federation ID, so I would like to use here federation ID. Leave the rest of the setting as it is. Just choose the certificate you have chosen for the IDP, and rest of the settings you can save as it is for now. So currently, you also need to give what profiles are going to use this single sign-on. So currently, since I am with my admin user, I would like to give my admin the permissions. Let's and after you give all your details and you get some of the links over here, which are like IDP initiated login URL. So this URL logs into your uh, service provider of. Let's test if this is working. So as you can see, without me being uh, let me show you again. So this is our identity provider org. So when I click on this link over here, it just redirects me to my service provider org, and that's how an SSO works. And we can connect many apps. So at one place, if you log into the identity provider org, you can connect many apps, many service provider apps, and you can log in without entering any credentials or going through any login procedures. Now, one thing we have missed over here is, so the name of the app is Areya Demo. Let's search if we have got that in our app launcher. So and there is no app called Areya Demo. The reason for this would be um, we have not given any start URL for our what you can say connected app. So when you populate the start URL, it would show you an app in your app launcher. Let's check since we have provided all the start URL over here. So we have got an app named Areya Demo in our app launcher. So it again redirected me to the service provider or as we are expecting the same results. So uh, when we are logging to our service provider or through our identity provider or that's what is called as our identity provider initiated flow. And SP initiated flow, to initiate our SP initiated flow, we need to go to the service provider or and then go to the my domain. Here, so authentication, in authentication configuration, you need to edit and add our what you can say identity providers URL and save it. So let me log out. Just copy your my domain URL or single sign-on entity ID and log out of all your service provider orgs. So I will now request for my service provider org directly. So when you go to the service provider org, you can see that it doesn't ask you for any password or anything. It just asks you that to log in from your identity provider settings. So when I click over it, since I'm logging with my another Salesforce instance in my another tab, it didn't ask me even for the credentials. So that's how and service provider initiated flow works. Um, the next thing we are going to see is SAML troubleshooting. So I have an extension to know what my SAML response is. The extension name is SAML tracer. You just need to open it in your background and try to log into your service provider. Or so the best thing about the service SAML tracer is that are you able to see my screen with the SAML logs?
No, it's on homepage itself.
Okay. Now,
Yes.
so the best thing about the SAML tracer is, so there are many logs that go on your background, but it gives you an indication that which one of your logs is a SAML response. You just click on that, and it gives you what parameters or the protocol it was calling, and there is one tab separately for the SAML response. You just copy this SAML response, and when you come to your service provider or go to single sign-on settings, there is a SAML assertion validator. Click on that. If you are having any error in your SAML responses or user is unable to log in, you can try this, and you need to click on validate. So it gives you all the if everything was okay in your SAML response or did anything go wrong. Also, if you can see the subject, so the subject was passed from the identity provider to your service provider, and that subject was Roshan Dev, and which is our federation ID, which we have used in both the orgs. So that's how an SSO works, and we have implemented that in our Salesforce orgs. Thank you.